All my inserts are in. I've got my two sets of jaws laid out. I've got the places marked where I'm going to put the blocks. So now I'm going to mix up a generous amount of epoxy. Now I'm going to lay my blocks in place. These will be cut down when we put them on the chuck, so there's no real need to get it perfect. And also I'm not going to clamp them. I'm just going to let gravity do its work. Spread them apart so I don't glue them together. While the epoxy is setting up, I want to take a slight detour and talk about block rims. There are some techniques for the expanding jaw chuck that are unique to block rims. The setup for cutting block rim segments is fairly straightforward. I have a miter saw set to 22.5 degrees, and I have a stop. This is going to yield 8 pieces for each layer of my block rim. Now we're going to turn our attention to the chuck again. As you can see, I've put the rubber feet on. This one I'm just finishing up tightening. And one really important use for the rubber feet is if you're making a block rim and you can't really use the inside jaws to face off your piece. Facing off means just do a skim cut to flatten it completely because it's just too tall. The tool bit is going to run into the top of the false jaw. So the rubber feet are really helpful in that if you have several layers to face off, you can quickly run them through the process. I'm expanding the jaws so that I get a nice snug fit. That looks pretty good. I turn it just to make sure that it's relatively flat. Now I can put on my tool bit. Tool bit is all mounted. I'm just going to find the appropriate depth of cut. That seems about right. Back it off. Turn on the lathe. That's got it. Now the cool thing about our expanding jaw chuck is I can just quickly loosen that up, flip it over, ready to go again. The next step in preparing each layer of my block rim would be to round off the outer diameter. Unfortunately, the jumbo jaws are just wide enough that I'll run the risk of running my tool into them if I try that. So it's time to switch over to the internal jaws. I'm starting to mount my internal jaws now, and I'm just going to put them on loosely for now, adjust them later. And also, these are going to be used for the first time, which means that we're going to have to true them up after they're in place on the chuck. And that act of truing them up while they're on the chuck is what makes false jaws so accurate. I'm using my block layer to get a rough idea about where the jaws should be situated. And so I'm going to pick this one as the first one to tighten. Now it's time to remount our rim layer on the internal jaws. We no longer have that problem with the tool bit running into the jumbo jaws because the base of the internal jaws is holding it off of the chuck. I'm finishing up mounting the tool holder, and our only objective at this point is to make this round. I don't need to be worried about the dimensions because I built in enough material here that I know that once I'm round I'll still be way away from the diameter I'm after in the final turning. So far, using the techniques I've showed you, I made 3 layers for my rim blank and glued them up, and here it is. I'm not going to cover all the turning techniques that are covered in Volume 1. At this point, we have to look at external jaws, and we have to look at how we can take our work off the lathe and put it back on, and using measurement tools, put it back on accurately. We're going to start by trimming the outside of the jaws, and if you were going to do a 12-inch rim, you might have to take them all the way down to there because you'll need the clearance at the bottom of the lathe. This lathe has about a 14-inch swing, but the blocks take up some of that. Now we're going to do the same for the inside of the external jaws. I'm loosening my jaws now, and I'm going to find the approximate position for gripping the rim that I'm going to mount. Using an actual piece of work, I'm more or less eyeballing the position of the jaws, and I'm also checking to make sure that they clear the bottom of the lathe. I'm tightening this jaw here. This will be the one that I use to measure the position for the other jaws. I'm using my router bit again to find the position. I make sure it just kisses that jaw, and then I'm going to move the others around so they match, like so. Up till now, the cutting I did on these jaws was for the purpose of getting them basically set up, and you only have to do those 2 steps on new jaws. From this point, this represents what you have to do every single time that you mount these jaws. So basically I'm going to cut the inside one more time because I had to move them out to accommodate the rim. I'm using the chuck key to tighten the jaws. And as you can see, they grip beautifully. There's one more step though that I like to do, because when you bore the inside of the rim, you want to leave a little clearance for the boring bar. So I'm just going to cut a little notch in the base of my jaws. So I'll mark it with pencil, and we'll go from there. I'm going to cut 1/8 of an inch notch from about 1/2 inch outside of my line to about within 1/2 inch of my block. Now I'd like to introduce you to a really awesome tool. That's the dial indicator with a magnetic base. When I turn the switch to the off position, this can move freely. As soon as I turn it on, the magnetic base holds it very solidly. Each of these notches represents 1/1000th of an inch. And just to give you an idea of how sensitive that is, 7 notches equals the thickness of a single edge razor blade. A lot of times when you put the rim on, it's actually centered very nicely just to begin with. In this case, I just slapped it on and I'm reading. You can turn the dial to 0, which is cool. And then I'm 5/1000ths out there. So total, I'm 5/1000ths out. I don't think anybody is going to see or care about 5/1000ths of an inch. Now, if it should be out, say, my rule of thumb is 7 to 10/1000ths, I start to think about taking action. And what you can do, if you're out a little bit more, is put a little slip of paper, find out what your high spot and low spots are, of course, then go to your low spot and slip a little paper or veneer inside the jaw, and you'll find that's very effective in centering it. You don't lose any gripping power, and you can get this thing as accurate as you want.